Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to explore a truly profound mystery of two philosophers, separated by 2,000 years, who use the exact same symbol of a cave to reach completely opposite conclusions about the truth. It's a fascinating journey that's going to take us all the way from ancient Greek philosophy to 17th century African rationalism, and finally, right into the heart of modern global health policy.
Let's dive right into this quote, because honestly, whether it's built out of ancient myths, massive empires, or even modern computer algorithms, the struggle to tell the difference between an inherited illusion and actual reality, well, that's literally the defining feature of being human. Every culture builds a cave, and the absolute deepest temptation we face is mistaking the shadow for the real thing. It's not just ancient history, it's a condition of the human mind that we're still grappling with right now. Section 1. Plato's Upward Climb. Escaping the prison. So, let's start our journey in 375 BCE with Plato. Picture him, surrounded by the marble bones of ancient Athens. He famously imagined humanity as prisoners, chained up since birth, just staring at shadows cast on a cave wall. Now, what happens when one prisoner is finally unchained? At first, the actual light of truth feels like a literal injury. To find real truth, he has to ascend out of the cave to see the sun. He has to climb up and away from the illusions of society. And here is the kicker. When he goes back down to free everyone else, he's met with total hostility and rejection by the people who actually prefer the shadows.
Section 2. Yacob's Inward Retreat, Seeking Solitude.
Now, this next part completely flips the script. We're jumping ahead to 1630, way up in the Ethiopian highlands, to meet Zara Yacob. Yacob was an Orthodox teacher who was accused of heresy and literally had to flee for his life. But here's the wild part. For Yacob, the loud, argumentative marketplace of human society, that was the actual prison of shadows. The physical cave wasn't something he needed to escape from at all. It was the only sanctuary quiet enough for him to finally hear himself think. He spent 2 whole years in the dark, without any books or teachers, using absolutely nothing but his own reason to dismantle and question every single inherited belief he'd ever been taught.
Section 3. 5 Contrasts of Truth. Upward versus inward. To really grasp this brilliant inversion, we need to look at 5 rapid-fire contrasts between these two revolutionary thinkers, starting with how they actually seek truth. Plato's philosopher is kind of like a mountaineer of the soul, right? Climbing upward, trying to escape the physical world to reach these pure external ideas. But Yacob's philosopher acts more like a solitary filter of logic. He doesn't climb anywhere. He just sits completely still in his cave, turning his gaze inward to see if his inherited traditions can actually hold up to reason. Next up, we see a massive divide in how they handle authority. Plato basically sees philosophy as this multi-generational relay race. He refines inherited wisdom through dialogues, constantly honoring his past teachers, like Socrates. Yacob does the exact opposite. He looks at his Ethiopian traditions, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, and just flat out refuses to believe what the elders taught simply because they said so. He forces himself to re-earn all his wisdom from scratch, insisting that truth has to survive the lonely light of your own reasoning.
Then, there's the big question. Who actually gets to access this truth? Well, Plato's cave has an exit that only the intellectual elite, the gifted philosopher kings, can ever hope to find. It's a very aristocratic view. But Jacob's cave? Its door swings wide open for absolutely anyone willing to knock. He fiercely argued that reason is a democratic truth, given equally by God to kings, slaves, men, and women alike.
And when we look at how they viewed the physical human body, the contrast is literally night and day. Plato viewed flesh as a cold prison that chains us and lies to our senses. He wanted to escape the body completely. Conversely, Yacob came down from his cave, married a servant woman, and vigorously defended natural human life. For him, the body was a warm, natural vessel, and its God-given desires for food and love were something to be deeply honored, not escaped.
Finally, what happens after the cave? One man believed that finding the truth would inevitably cost you your life. For Plato, the story ends in tragic martyrdom when the enlightened philosopher returns to his fellow prisoners. But Zara Yacob? He believed truth was the only way to actually get your life back. His story ends with a long, peaceful life as a husband, father, and teacher.
Section 4. Modern Caves, the Vitamin A Wars.
Okay, let's execute a major pivot here. We're stepping out of ancient stone hollows and heading straight into the metaphorical caves of modern science and global health policy.
We're going to apply Jacob's core philosophy, dismantling inherited tradition using the solitary light of new evidence, to what we can call the cave of inherited science. Specifically, we'll look at how a 40-year-old public health policy became a totally unquestioned tradition, sparking one of the fiercest methodological clashes in modern epidemiology.
This timeline right here is a perfect illustration of policy lock-in. It shows how global health institutionalized an intervention so deeply over decades that it became incredibly difficult to dismantle, even when the evidence changed. It all started back in 1983 when Alfred Sommer linked mild deficiency to mortality. By 1993, a meta-analysis locked this in as a global policy. But then Oxford University started the massive DV-TAFTA trial in India in 1999. And get this, the results of that huge trial weren't finally published until 2013.
So what was this inherited scientific consensus? Well, based on older trials from the 1980s and early 90s, the data showed a massive 23% reduction in childhood mortality simply by giving kids vitamin A capsules. I mean, that is huge. This incredible number turned vitamin A into a celebrated magic bullet in the global health community.
But then came the DV-TAFTA trial. This was a disruptive, massive study testing 1 million children in Uttar Pradesh. And what did it find? Only a 4% reduction in mortality, and a statistically insignificant one at that. Just let that sink in. This single number threatened to completely unmake the entire established narrative. It was a massive shock to the system, acting just like Jacob's solitary light of new reason against decades of inherited public health tradition.
Of course, the original researchers, the Hopkins team, didn't just take this lying down. They launched a fierce and honestly scientifically valid counterattack against the new Oxford data. They pointed out a remarkably low control event rate, meaning fewer deaths occurred overall than they expected. They questioned the adherence, noting that only 86% coverage was actually verified. And crucially, they highlighted that modern Indian populations had a much lower baseline vitamin A deficiency to begin with. The context had fundamentally changed.
This clash brought up a fascinating philosophical dilemma around the precautionary principle. Both sides passionately invoked it. It turns out, erring on the side of caution is kind of an empty phrase until you specify exactly which type of error you're trying to avoid. The Hopkins advocates argued that caution meant using the older, proven evidence to make sure we keep saving lives. But the Oxford researchers, they argued that caution meant not wasting precious global health resources based on outdated data.
By 2017, a totally neutral Cochrane review revealed a really awkward middle ground. It showed that pooling data across entirely different eras of public health creates a dangerous illusion of certainty. For pre-1990 trials, where there was severe deficiency and low vaccination rates, the mortality reduction was high and statistically significant. But for post-1990 trials, which took place in modern context with way better baseline health, the effect was much lower and crossed right over into statistical insignificance.
You see, scientific effect sizes are not eternal constants. They dropped from 34% in the 1986 Sumatra trial to 23% in the 1993 meta-analysis, all the way down to 4% in the 2013 DV-TAFTA trial. Why? Because facts in epidemiology are deeply conditional on the changing contexts of the world. Simply put, as the world gets healthier overall, the relative impact of a single intervention naturally shrinks.
Section 5. Finding Your Own Light. Methodological Echoes.
As we step out of the vitamin A wars, the hardest lesson from both the Ethiopian cave and the Indian medical trials becomes super clear. We can see the exact philosophical archetypes of Plato and Yacob actively shaping how we navigate truth today. We're constantly struggling to distinguish between ideal efficacy and real-world effectiveness. We're learning that scientific certainty is dynamic, not stable. And honestly, the era of finding definitive randomized answers is ending because the world keeps evolving while we're trying to study it. Internal validity is totally useless without external context. It demands a serious amount of epistemic humility from all of us.
So, whether you choose to climb upward out of the cave to find truth like the ancient Greek, or retreat inward into the quiet of the cave like the Ethiopian, this explainer leaves you with one final, provocative question about the inherited beliefs you've been taught to call real. What are the shadows on your wall? And when you finally turn and see the fire casting those shadows, will you look outward to the sun, or will you go deeper inside until the only voice left is your own? Thanks so much for exploring the cave with us today.